2. 1, 2, 3.
Are you ready, America? It's time for another edition of Game On. With your host, Stevie Ray Braun, and Brad Bad News Bollinger. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Game On. Talking about your favorite sports and different parts of life. Might even get a little take on Lane Kiffin's wife. They tell you what they think and not afraid to take a stance. They'll give you the number of pleats in Charlie Weiss's pants. They're the game on guys, see sports through their eyes. Political correctness just up and dies when they give you their views on any sport you want to hear. They're the game on guys, eating fries, drinking beer.
That is right, it is Game On. Steve Braun, Brad Bollinger, glad to be back hosting once again Game On. Life got in the way, that's why we disappeared. But if you were following us on Instagram or TikTok, you got all our picks. Brad had a great season last year.
Thank you.
We won't even talk about me.
It was a miracle run.
It really was.
Did you ever get those final totals for us, Steve?
No, I did not.
Did that slip past?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
I knew you did really well.
We'll have to get Stat Boy on that.
Yeah. Which one of us is Stat Boy?
I thought you hired an intern.
No, it wasn't in the budget.
Okay, fine. I'll be Stat Boy.
Okay. I mean, if you can find
mostly
somebody.
because it's about me, so I will put in the work, you know?
I was about to say, it's really going to be your benefit.
When I'm in a good light, I will work harder than anybody you know.
That is so true. So true.
Good to be back with you, though, buddy.
It is good to be back, man. Glad we can do this. Our little escape that I think 9 or 10 people seem to listen to occasionally, and we'll take it.
Okay, that's cool. That's absolutely cool.
Yeah, I'm not going to complain. SEC for OU now. Don't know if you knew that.
I did.
They threw parties and everything.
They did, yes.
I think they had fireworks. I don't think they had a concert quite like Texas did. Didn't Texas have Mr. Worldwide or something? I don't even know. Anyways, OU's in the SEC. The Big 12 is minus OU and Texas now, but they added Colorado, Utah, and the 2 Arizona schools. And the University of Tulsa, well, they're trying to get things righted after a tough season in the first year of head coach Kevin Wilson. Brad, let's start out as college football got going last week with week 0, but this week, week 1, games start tomorrow, Thursday night, as we record this on Sunday night. And Oklahoma, actually Tulsa, will kick things off first of the local teams on Thursday night. But let's talk OU. They're the top bill when it comes to the state teams. And they head into the SEC with, I think, some optimism, but also some question marks. Jackson Arnold, after just one start in the bowl game last season, over 350 yards passing. He was impressive at times. He was disappointing at times in that contest as well with turnovers. He's back. A lot of optimism from fans when it comes to him in the backfield. A lot of talent coming in at wide receiver and tight end. And then for the first time in a long time, the defense, at least on paper, appears to be the strength for this OU team.
It's a whole new world, Steve. Let me tell you. And I will say, in defense of Jackson,
all right, Aladdin,
game last year, I think that was just a tough situation to be placed into. Obviously, they knew that they weren't going to be in any meaningful, postseason games. Dylan Gabriel announces that he is transferring. Jeff Lebby, the offensive coordinator, departs for a new position. So they just kind of had to scramble there for the bowl game. And Jackson Arnold, of course, was plugged in to see what he had. And, he played about as you would expect a young quarterback to play in that situation. I think he showed a lot of bright spots, like you said. Got to take better care of the ball. And I'm sure he'll be the first one to tell you that. But yeah, I think the whole concept of new offensive coordinators coming in, not a lot of preparation time. I think it was just a weird situation for everybody. Not saying that they didn't care about the bowl game, but I think that can be kind of a throwaway game. All the credit in the world to Arizona, of course, but I think we can throw that away. That's my opinion. Mm-hmm. And now we get to the real stuff. SEC play. I think we have a decent defense now, which I haven't been able to say in, I don't know, a quarter of a century probably, but I'm excited. I think you've got guys on the offensive side of the ball like Jackson Arnold and Andrell Anthony, who I am very excited about. We talked about him a little bit last year when he went down with an injury. I texted you and said, I think that's a really big blow for them for the rest of the year. I think he was showing glimpses of being a number one guy before his injury. And I'm excited to see what he can do, hopefully with a full year of health and a new quarterback. And then you flip it over the defensive side of the ball. You've got your cornerstones and Stutzman and Bowman, and it's a balanced football team. It really feels like OU is going to have an extremely balanced football team, and that's just a new world for OU fans. So interested to see how it looks. But hey, it's SEC ball now, so you're going to take some losses, and we've talked about this in the past too. It's a matter of, I think you get in those stretches of, you play Alabama and LSU the last few weeks, and it's like, okay, if we go on a stretch of 3 games where we play top 15 opponents, if we can win 2 out of those 3, that's a win in our book. And that's kind of the world OU fans are looking at these days. And it's a new world. It's more professional. Players are getting paid. It's all out in the open now. They're employees, and it's a professional league, and we're not going to have any more undefeated seasons. I mean, there might be one here and there, but we got to get that mindset out of our heads of, if we don't win every single game, then it's a failure. Or if we don't win the national championship, then it's a failure. Yes, have high expectations, but this thing is being built. Brent Venables took over a few years ago, and he's had to really transform this program and this roster into an SEC worthy roster.
Yeah.
They're built for the Big 12, and he had to transform it into size, strength, along with the athleticism that they already had. But now you got guys up front that are just absolute monsters, NFL players on both sides of the ball, offensive and defensive line, just big athletic dudes. And that's where the biggest question mark in my mind is for OU is, can they compete with that size that the Alabamas and the Georgias typically have? So I think that'll be the deciding factor, but recruiting's coming along nicely. They're trying to fill those positions and get those type of guys. And I'd like to think they're on the right path. I think it's a process. And as an OU fan, we're not used to having to be patient and things like that. So I think this is a big year. Mm-hmm. I think it's a measuring stick type of season. Not saying they have to win it all, but they have to be competitive in the SEC because they belong in the best conference in the nation. They're blue blood, and their fans expect nothing less. Boosters expect nothing less. We can't put, 500 seasons up in 2 out of the last 3 years. So it's time to put your money where your mouth is and line up and play some football.
Yeah, no doubt about it. You touched on some things that I think are great points, especially not only for OU fans, but just college football fans in general when it comes to undefeated seasons and 1 loss and 2. With the college football playoff and the expansion to 12 teams, that's going to change that dynamic of what is a good and bad season, in my mind.
It will. And I think it was unfair even in the Big 12 to have that mindset.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's how spoiled this fan base has been with the length of success from the Stoops era into, even, of course, Lincoln Riley for a couple years. They were so accustomed to being elite that fans would turn as soon as you would lose a game you're not supposed to lose. I mean, that happens. Should they beat, teams like Kansas State and Texas Tech and teams like that on a regular basis? Yes, of course, but those aren't scrubs on the other side of the ball. Even in the Big 12, there's some really talented teams. So I think the last 3 years, honestly, have been really a wake-up call, hopefully, for the fan base to be like, okay, let's temper those expectations and get realistic about what success looks like now.
Yeah, I think just college football fans in general are going to have to come to understand with the expansion of the Big Ten, the expansion of the SEC, even the Big 12. There's going to be losses because the depth of those conferences, they're much deeper now. I mean, the Big 12, adding OU, adding Texas, yes, Texas has struggled for the last decade. But they see Sarkisian, at least based off of last season, seems to have got things at least moving in the right direction. We've seen this before, though. I want to see, can they do it again?
Right. And typically their style of play probably lends better to SEC play as well. So I think that's why a lot of people kind of had them ahead of OU at this point, is just, they have those big guys up front typically. I mean, that's Texas, what Texas does. That's the recruiting style and everything. But
and Texas is about a year in advance of, or they're a year ahead in the process because Sarkisian is entering his 4th season, whereas Brent Venables is entering his 3rd. So that makes sense why they would be a year ahead in the process of being SEC ready. Sarkisian came in and started recruiting for the SEC the minute he got there. He started bringing in, like you mentioned, those big guys up front. So I think that's a dynamic, and I thought that was an excellent point you made. Hitting on the wide receiver core, Andrell Anthony, I think he's a guy that, how fast can he come back from, I want to say it was an ACL last year, but being able to come back from that injury and being ready to go. Brennan Thompson is a guy that a lot of people, Brent Venables said he led the team in receiving throughout camp. So another guy that we saw glimpses of last year. Nick Anderson's returning. He's not going to play in the game against Temple. Andrell Anthony will. BV announced that in the last day or two. And then Deion Burks, the transfer from Purdue. Everybody, he is a guy that people are considering a first-round worthy pick in the NFL draft after this season. So what is he able to do? What kind of chemistry will Jackson Arnold have with him? And then, of course, you got Jalil Farouk and some of the other guys that have been in the program for a while. Definitely exciting there. Tight end, it looks like it's going to be improved with Bauer Sharp and Jake Roberts. But it's going to come down to that offensive line. And there's 4 transfer guys that could potentially be starting along that offensive line. How fast can they gel? We know what Bedenbaugh can do. His track record is remarkable. Some of the top offensive linemen in the NFL, salary-wise, but just in general, guys that he coached. You just look at Trent Williams. Creed Humphrey just signed a big contract with Kansas City Chiefs. They all went through Bedenbaugh. So we know he's able to make it happen. And what's optimistic to me is there's a lot of talk during the spring that, like Spencer Brown, the transfer from Michigan State, people were kind of underwhelmed, I guess would be a good way of stating it. Now, you listen to, I don't know if you listen to the Oklahoma Breakdown or watch that with Teddy Lehman and Gabe Eichert, but Gabe and Teddy both have, and Gabe especially, who played offensive line, was a center, was in NFL camps as well. He said, "Man, it's remarkable to see the transformation of Spencer Brown and the improvement from spring to now." And I think that speaks to Bill Bedenbaugh. So, how fast can they gel? They've done a lot of those 4 guys have done it somewhere else. at the Division I level, USC, SMU, Michigan State, North Texas. Are they able to do it, though, in the SEC? And that's going to be the big question. Defensive line side of things, I think that's still a work in progress. There's optimism. Dominique Williams from TCU is a very impressive player. I think he's going to be interesting. I'm eager to see Jaden Jackson, the freshman from IMG Academy, that is pegged to be the starter. And then you got the defensive ends. Can we get pressure on the quarterback? That's what it's going to come down to. Ethan Downs, PJ Adebayorwe, R. Mason Thomas, Trace Ford. Does Danny Okoye, the Tulsa Noah homeschool product as a freshman, get out on the field? What can they do? Because that's going to be the difference. Yeah, it's great to have Danny Stutzman, but if he's having to take on blockers, then we're in trouble. And that's where those guys up front are going to be big. The defensive backfield, I think, is going to make a big difference as well because there's so much there. That's going to make the defensive line's job a little bit easier as well, in my opinion.
I agree. And, it's funny because I would feel so confident if OU had someone up front like a Gerald McCoy or a Tommy Harris type of guy. Just one absolute stud on that defensive line to kind of hold down that fort. Because like you said, I mean, if the D-line isn't getting penetration, if they're not pushing it back a little bit, then that's going to free up those offensive linemen and come and take off, some of our strengths with our Danny Stutzman and our Knack and like all those linebackers. They kind of get exposed to those giant SEC offensive linemen, the pulling guards, everybody coming up to that second level and finding those linebackers. So really, yes, secondary linebacking core, there's some absolute studs there, but will it mean as much if there's nothing up front? So you can see it in the recruiting process. You can see how much emphasis they're putting on getting that size up front and getting those playmakers up front. And I think the defensive line will kind of dictate in a way how OU's season is going to go. How well the defensive line plays is probably about how far OU is going to go. So, hey, it's a new year, new players, new faces. Let's see who steps up. Hopefully there can be another Gerald McCoy or Tommy Harris type of guy. I know that's a high bar to set, but someone's got to come in and make some plays on that defensive line. It can't just be 4 no-namers up front just taking up space anymore. Someone has to go rush the passer. Someone has to plug those running lanes. It's time for that crew to really step up.
Yeah, totally agree with you there. Let's move over to Oklahoma State. Cowboys. I saw where Alan Bowman on Channel 6, News 9, they had their football special. They interviewed him, and he stated, I want to say it was 19 starters or significant playing time type guys returning to that program. And I think that's a sense of optimism. A team that made the Big 12 championship last year. Yes, they got blown out by Texas, but they had success. Ollie Gordon is back, Heisman Trophy candidate, and a lot of preseason predictions have him in that race. And you bring back a guy like Brennan Presley and Rashad Owens, and they get Gavin Freeman as well, a guy that we saw at OU that had success as well. Offensive line returning a lot of guys. A defense that returns a number of players, including Colin Oliver and Nick Martin and even Justin Wright, who was injured, the transfer from Tulsa. Kendall Daniels makes the move from safety to linebacker. I think there's a good reason why Oklahoma State fans could be optimistic. But it's kind of like what we said with OU, the cautious optimism, I think, is the case for OSU as well, because there are so many new faces to this conference as well. Utah has been really, really good for the last 2 decades, basically, it seems like. You have a TCU program that 2 years ago was in the national championship. So I think there's a lot of Kansas State's good. Kansas seems to be on the rise. There's a lot of parity, and it's not to say that the Big 12's not deep and talented, because I think they are, but it's amazing the level of parity. Arizona, another one that you have to mention. I mean, it's just Colorado. Who knows what Deion's able to cook up over there? I mean, he returned some key players. They brought in some key players. So for Oklahoma State, in my mind, there's a lot of optimism, but it's a cautious optimism because, yeah, you do return so many, but there's so many question marks within your conference just as a whole. And does that beat down? Because it just doesn't seem like there's a ton of cupcakes on your schedule. There's not necessarily those games that you're like, yep, that's a definite win. I mean,
correct. Yeah.
I'm looking at South Dakota State to kick it off. By the way, they've won the last 2 FCS national championships. That could be an issue. You play Arkansas. Bobby Petrino is their offensive coordinator now. Who knows what goes on with that? Tulsa could be better. I don't think they're going to be good enough to beat Oklahoma State, but you never know. It's at Tulsa. Then you have to go. Then you go play Utah, Kansas State, and oh, by the way, West Virginia, who's also good all of a sudden because Neil Brown's got them turned around heading into last season where he was on the hot seat. A bye, then at BYU, that might be your one. Hey, we should probably win that for sure. Baylor, at Baylor, I would give that one as well. Arizona State. So middle of your season, you have 3 games that's like, yeah, we should probably win those. But then it's at TCU, a bye, Texas Tech, at Colorado. I mean, that's a tough slate for Oklahoma State.
It is. And, I think with the Big 12 in general, when you lose teams such as Oklahoma and Texas, I think naturally you kind of develop a lot of optimism because it's like, oh, it's way more open these days. I mean, we don't have these blue bloods, taking up the championship game. Like, I mean, what did it end up being? 14 or so Big 12 championships for OU?
Yeah, right around there.
Right around there. And, it's only been around since like 96 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And when you kind of face that year after year, it's got to be demoralizing because OU is going to be there. Texas is going to be there, every year or every other year, if that. And now there's new faces and old faces and teams like Oklahoma State. You got to feel good because you kind of feel like the veteran in this conference now. You kind of feel like one of those top teams, and you're facing new teams like Utah and let's say Arizona, for example, who's on the rise in my opinion. It's a new look. We aren't used to them. We're not used to going and traveling out to Utah playing a game there. But on the flip side, those teams aren't used to playing Oklahoma State. They're not used to playing at Boone Pickens Stadium, right? They're not used to that miniature sideline that stadium has. They're not used to the paddles slapping the wall every godforsaken second of the game. So, I mean, it goes both ways. And I tell you what, it doesn't hurt to have a guy like Ollie Gordon kind of being that anchor for Oklahoma State either. When you can kind of hand him the ball, 25 times a game and say, hey, go get us some first downs, go get us some touchdowns. And you've got, the 37-year-old Alan Bowman in there with plenty of experience and, expertise. And I think he's going to do a good job of managing his role. I don't think he's going to make very many superstar type plays, of course, but will he do his job? Yeah, I think he will. So hand the ball to Ollie Gordon, little play action here and there. Don't turn the ball over. I think they'll be in good shape.
Totally agree with you. Definitely agree. All right. You want to make our way to the American Athletic Conference?
Yes, sir.
University of Tulsa, Kevin Wilson, second year of him being the head coach there. And it's a program that there's some major question marks, I think, going into this season. They had to kind of turn to a walk-on quarterback last year, and Kirk Francis, he's back. after going 4-8 last year, 2-6 in the American Athletic Conference. You have him back, but Wilson is saying, well, he's not necessarily the starter. He's going to start tomorrow night as we record this on Wednesday. So for their Thursday game against Northwestern State, he will get the start. Kirk Francis will, but as Kevin Wilson stated, he's not necessarily the starter, if that makes sense. It's a three-man race of Cooper Lagasse, who transferred in from Utah State, and then Cardell Williams is back as well, the sophomore, who started 4 games last season. Question marks there. Anthony Watkins is back at running back. He's been impressive. 1,500 yards rushing in his career at TU, averaging 5.3 within his career. And then you have a number of receivers that are back as well, including Camden Benjamin, Braylon Presley, who, if they can figure out how to actually use him, would be impressive or be important. But there's a lot of question marks. I do like the fact that you got Owen Ostrowski back. He's been impressive for them. A nice player off the edge. They've got 2 transfers, Broken Arrow guys, and Gavin Potter and Zach Marcelli. And then a number of grad transfers and transfers in as well in the defensive backfield. But I think there's a lot of question marks for this Tulsa team. And it's a little bit of, okay, yeah, we brought in some of these transfers, but can they make a difference? And you're in an American Athletic Conference that you have Memphis. You have some teams that can make some noise, and it'll be interesting to see how things shake out for TU.
It will be, and I've always been a fan of Kevin Wilson. I think he's going to get this ship going in the right direction. And you look at TU's schedule last year, 8 losses, tough luck, right? Only getting 4 wins. Mm-hmm. It's hard to kind of take a lot of positive out of that. But if I can just sprinkle some semblance of optimism, I mean, you take a look at it, 4 of those 8 losses were 1-possession games.
Yeah.
I mean, a few of those go the other way. It could be a completely different look to that season, right?
And I would say those were poor mistakes as well by
Absolutely.
TU. I mean, it was a little bit of TU causing or leading to it. Yeah,
that's to be expected with the situation that they're in, and Kevin Wilson coming in and trying to rebuild this thing. There's going to be some growing pains, and especially in this new landscape of college football with the transfer portals, NIL deals, obviously. I think teams like Tulsa are the ones that are hurt the most as far as a competitive advantage goes. But they always seem to, they always seem to pull it together every, 5 years. They might make a magical run and win, some exciting 8-win seasons or 9-win seasons, or go to a bowl game and surprise some people. And, Kevin Wilson, I think he's had a track record of success, and there's no reason not to believe that he will improve this program. I know you look at it last year and you say, well, how can you not improve? But seriously, I mean, like we were talking about with the OU fan base, you got to have a little patience, and you've got to have a little belief in when you bring in a guy like that. You got to trust the process, right? It's not Embiid by any means, but it's trusting the process, realizing that, hey, this is going to take a few years to build. He's got to get his guys in there in his system and build this thing the way he typically runs things for that tide to start turning a little bit. And this will be an important year. I think they need to take a step forward. I'd like to see, obviously a few more wins, but a lot of those mistakes that you mentioned, I want to see those erased, because I think that'll make a difference in a lot of these losses that they're facing. Like I said before, 4 out of the 8 losses, 1-possession game. I mean, that's all it is. When you break down the game of football, it's simple, right?
Yep.
It's don't turn the ball over.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's win your battles up front. It's, do all the simple stuff the right way, and you put yourself in a position to win the game. They were in positions to win a lot of these games. I mean, hell, they went to Washington the second week of the year. And yeah, they got beat 43-10, but I mean, it was a competitive for what that roster was last year. I think it was a competitive performance.
Definitely.
And Washington, obviously, as we know, national championship game. We know how great they were with Penix and all those talented receivers and all that. I mean, 43-10. That's one of those losses that we were talking about. Like, you know, in the SEC, there's good losses, and like with Tulsa, it's the same situation. I understand it's on a different scale, but there's good losses with Tulsa, and I think that was a good loss. I think that's a tough environment. I think they learned a lot. The effort was there. I don't think they were ran off the field by any means. I think they held their own, and that's what you build off of in that, you know, those initial years when there's not a lot to kind of be proud of necessarily as far as the wins and losses go, but you got to take those things, and that's how you build on each year, right? Like last year we look at that, and then this year we incorporate that into our game plan, and hey, maybe we get a couple more of those losses that were one possession games. Then we take that moving forward to next year, and it's just slowly building that momentum. And with a guy like Kevin Wilson, I have hope for Tulsa.
I agree. I think he will get things turned around. It'll just be a matter of when. And do I think it could be this season? Maybe. As you mentioned, those close games, typically you see those flip the other way the next season. So with that, there's optimism, and there's not a whole lot of expectation. I mean, this is a team that is picked to finish 12th out of a 14-team conference. The only two teams they're ahead of are Charlotte and Temple. And Charlotte's head coach doesn't wear sleeves. So, and Temple fans, ever since Bill Cosby had things happen, Temple football hasn't been relevant. So
hard to recover from that.
Yeah, it is. It's been tough for Jello as well. Let's move on. I don't know how to make a good transition.
Let's move on for sure. Yeah, let's move.
But let's move on. DeMarco Murray will have a 1-game suspension. Brent Venables announced today that they weren't going to announce when that would actually be served. So Murray, over 16 months, had contacted 17 prospects, including 65 impermissible phone calls and 36 impermissible text messages. This is dating back to, I believe, 2 years ago at least. Self-reported by the University of Oklahoma's compliance office, self-imposed penalties that included that. So to me, this is a slap on the wrist. You made a mistake. We're going to take care of it. And the fact that it was self-reported is a good thing. I've heard a lot of people talking about, why is the NCAA spending time on things like this? Aren't there bigger fish to fry? First of all, the NCAA, most people don't understand how it's even structured. It's a volunteer association. You don't have to be a member of it, technically. Universities decide to be members. It's just like joining the Better Business Bureau. You don't have to. There's other options for athletics. Is the NCAA Division I the premier national association? Yes, it is. So that's why these teams are in there. But they also are, universities as a whole, as a combined whole, form it, and they also are able to make the rules. This is one of those rules that they made. And it was a violation by DeMarco Murray. He basically stated, hey, I thought we were still under the COVID calendar. That was my mistake. Part of this, from what I understood, may have taken place while Lincoln Riley was still the head coach or during the transition and all of that. So that's why Brent Venables did not face a suspension, which is typically the penalty for something like that. But they agreed, the NCAA and OU, that, hey, this wasn't worthy. It wasn't appropriate for BV to face a suspension. The other thing that I want to note for folks, OU's compliance office is not within the athletic department. When Rep Bomar and all of that took place, it was not long after that that the University of Oklahoma decided, hey, we're going to move the compliance office from being a report to the athletic director, Joe Castiglione, and instead move them out of the athletic department, at least on the organizational chart. They're actually going to sit over here, and they're going to report to OU legal counsel. Because they wanted an unbiased compliance department that would be able to kind of function as a third party in a sense. Yes, it stinks that this happened. It's not great, but at least they caught it. And as a guy that worked at a institution that was transitioning from NAI to NCAA at one point in the membership process, I'll never forget there was a consultant that came in and said, basically, it's a good thing for you as a university to report secondary violations. Because if you're reporting secondary violations, they know that your compliance office is actually trying to do their job. Whereas if you're not reporting anything, that's when the NCAA starts looking at you and going, you're telling me that you're perfect? There is nothing going on in your department? And that's when they start snooping. So is this a little bit bigger? I don't think it's necessarily secondary, but yes, it's a little bit bigger, but it's a level 1 it's a level 2 mitigated penalties for the university when it comes to Venables and Murray with this incident. He's going to serve the suspension. They're not going to be able to recruit, make phone calls for like 3 weeks in January and into February, I want to say. And then after that, we'll all forget about this and we'll move on. And the greatest part of this is that his recruiting days were cut down basically in half, from 16.4 down to 8. And you know what he went out and did? He still went and signed Taylor Tatum, the number 1 running back in the nation. So don't worry, OU fans. It's not that big of a deal. It's a good thing that they reported this, and they're going to be able to move on.
Yeah, and everything doesn't have to be a huge scandal, right? Sometimes mistakes happen. I think, obviously, I'm not in the room or wasn't around for all of these instances of impermissible phone calls, text messages, things like that. But to me, the excuse that was presented from him was, he wasn't aware that the the COVID era.
Yeah, the COVID calendar was no longer in effect.
Right. So that to me says, it could just be lip service.
Oh, you still there, Brad? Think we may have lost Brad for just a second. We'll try to work to get him back. But I agree with Brad. I think it is lip service. I'm going to send him a message that we may have lost him. But it does seem to be lip service, that the fact that, hey, it just may have been his way of covering it up and saying, hey, I thought the calendar was still there. But even if it wasn't, if it is the truth, the fact that they were able to report it is a huge deal for the University of Oklahoma to be able to find a way to report this and to move on, to be able to self-impose so many things that they did. The NCAA to agree to those self-imposed aspects is very important. So among the infractions, the penalties that came down as part of that, a prohibition against unofficial visits during this first game of the season. So there will be no unofficial visits for the Temple game. I don't think there's any love lost in that. I mentioned the 3-week ban on recruiting phone and electronic correspondence for the football program. That actually goes from December 8th to March 31st, 2025. So I think they're going to kind of split that up, I would imagine. And I think there's a dead period in there as well where some contact can't take place, or that aspect as well. What was interesting as well within this, as Brad's back with us, it appears. What was also interesting is that the University of Oklahoma's track and field coach had been fired or was dismissed. There's a separation there that took place during the off season. And it kind of seemed out of nowhere, and then you come to find out that, hey, he had directed a female student athlete to distribute her cost of attendance scholarship funding over to two male student athletes, and then he lied to the compliance office during their investigation and said, yeah, that didn't happen. And the student athletes reported, yeah, we saw it. They turned over bank records, and that led to him ultimately being dismissed for misleading information and not cooperating in that. And he will actually face a 4-year show cause, 50% if he does become employed by an NCAA institution, 50% of his first season he'll be suspended. During the last 2 years of the show cause order, he's restricted from off-campus recruiting. I mean, there's so many different different things that go into that. That is going to be a headache for Langford, the now former OU track and field coach. And I think we got Brad back with us, able to get the connection. The Gremlins corralled at least for a little bit. Before we move to the college football predictions, I'll let you give your thoughts as you were in the middle of it about DeMarco Murray's suspension, and that it might be lip service with him talking about the COVID calendar and that aspect.
Yeah, I just think it seems like it's an easy excuse to use. And I don't think that's a good or bad thing necessarily. I think it's just, I find it very plausible that, hey, this, once in a lifetime pandemic era that we experienced brought about new rules that, a lot of people might not have been aware of. DeMarco obviously didn't realize that those COVID rules expired by that point, and was sending text messages, phone calls, things like that. I don't know. Like I said before, I don't think everything has to be a major scandal. Violations happen. This seems like a much smaller in scale violation. I don't think there was any ill will or anything. And like you said, self-reported. People are doing their jobs. Yeah, we don't have any unofficial visits for the Temple game. Like you said, I don't think that's going to be a big deal. There's going to be a period of time. I believe you mentioned this too, but somewhere in the beginning of the new year, there's going to be a 3-week ban from recruiting phone and, emails and text messages and things like that. And I think there's like a $5,000 fine, and it's all very minor, minuscule things. I think it's just a case of, all right, we did the crime, let's do the time. DeMarco's going to sit out a game. All those other, enforcements that are happening. I think it's fine. Just call it what it is and say, hey, he messed up. He might not have known a certain rule expired, but hey, he violated it, and they're getting punished. And let's move on. So, speaking of moving on, I would like to discuss the brand new landscape of the college football postseason.
Let's do it.
Steve, we have ourselves a 12-team playoff. How are we feeling about it?
Hallelujah. I think it's great. A lot of people have always have talked about, it's gonna water down the regular season. It's gonna make it less important. I think it's actually gonna make it more important later in the year.
Correct. Yes.
Whereas in the past, if you lost in those final 3 weeks of the season, it was basically a death nail to your season, your playoff chances. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be the case. I think it keeps teams alive that do lose then. It also keeps teams alive that maybe have 2 losses throughout. Yes, we will have discussions about the 13th and 14th and 15th and maybe even the 16th ranked teams and how they should have got in.
Well, there's always going to be that, right? As we know from March Madness.
Exactly.
I mean, we're talking about 66, 67,
yes.
68.
I mean, we were breaking down if OU should have got in this past March. Like, and they were a middle of the pack Big 12 team. So, I think that's going to make it more exciting. Yes, it's probably going to be dominated by the SEC and the Big Ten, but we'll see. Who knows how this can play out? I love that the Power Four are going to have an automatic bid. I love that there's going to be a Group of 5 team that gets in. The highest ranked Group of 5 team will make it in as well. They have arrangements to where Notre Dame can't get one of the byes. I think that's another nice move, especially because they're not going to play in a conference championship game. So that is their bye in a sense if they are eligible to make the college football playoff. So I think all of that is great for college football and will add excitement. And let's be honest, the bowl games were getting old.
Right.
Bowl games didn't mean anything for a lot of these teams that would be falling into that. You saw a lot of guys not playing them, decide not to play. Now they will play in those games.
Well, hell, you talk about players opting out. How about coaches?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I'm taking a new job. I'm not going to coach the bowl game. Don't want to be a distraction. Whatever excuse they want to bring up. I mean, I think there's this all, holier than thou attitude from coaches for a long time of when, it's a fairly recent thing of guys opting out of college bowl games, but I feel like when that started, there was a lot of criticism and coaches didn't really have the best attitude towards that type of behavior. And I know it was a new thing for a lot of people of like, oh, well, why would he quit on his team? And it's not that. Like I said earlier in the show, college football is a business, and each of these players are trying to build their own brand, right?
Yep.
The coaches are making tons of money off of these players. The schools are making tons of money off of these players. So when we turn that around and the players are starting to realize their window to make money as a professional athlete is very small. The shelf life of an athlete, I mean, if you're lucky, maybe a decade. I mean, if you're lucky. And that's guys who get to go to pro level football, right? So the majority of these guys aren't even going to make it that far. So while they're in college, a majority of these kids too come from backgrounds where they're not necessarily wealthy or affluent, people already. So this is really their first taste of getting paid for their services and having some income and being able to, do certain things that are so basic as like pay my bills, put food on the table for my family, things like that. So yeah, if they want to protect their bodies and their brand and, their way of life for a little while, then why are we judging these kids? So all that to say, I think it's bogus. The playoffs now kind of delete that for me because outside of that 12-team playoff, I don't think people are going to really care about anything else, honestly, obviously. So I love that it eliminates that whole discussion because it was getting tiring. And honestly, a majority of the bowl season was getting very boring. It was a lot of teams that were, had half their rosters and guys were already checked out. Coaches were already checked out. It was just pointless. So this brings that competitiveness and, even teams kind of on that bubble, right?
Yep.
It's a situation where, if there's a Caleb Williams type where previously there was no chance of them making that 14 playoff, then hey, they might have, I wouldn't say necessarily sit out a regular season game, but they might have been protecting themselves a little more conservative in their play style, right? If there was nothing really to play for in that sense. So this eliminates that. This brings the competitive fire. Fans are going to watch regular season regardless. So I don't think it takes anything away from that. Each week's going to be exciting. You're jockeying for playoff position too.
Yep.
The cool thing about the playoffs is, that those slots starting at 5, what is it, through 8, or I think it is 5 through 9,
yeah.
Something like that. Anyways, those teams, they 1 through 4 get the buys, right?
Yes.
But those 5 through 8 or 9 or whatever it is, they get to host home games in the college football playoff, and that's a brand new dynamic that we haven't seen before. And that is so exciting for teams. So yeah, I mean, if you need to sneak in from, 11, 10, if you can get that late season win to jump ahead to host a home playoff game, I mean, you can't tell me that's not going to be more exciting.
Yeah, I totally agree. So let's make our predictions. At least among the Power Four and the Group of Five, who do you have making it into the college football playoff as the automatic qualifier for those four conferences, and then the Group of Five, and then if you want to throw in a few more that you think are going to get in, let's break it down.
All right, let's do it. I'll run through them real quick with
Okay.
the automatic qualifiers, the who I believe will be representing the conference at the top. Let's start in the SEC. We've been talking about SEC for a while. I think it's Georgia's game until proven otherwise. I'm not going to go against them by any means, so I have Georgia coming out on top of the SEC. In the Big 12, wide open, brand new landscape in the Big 12, and it's going to be exciting because there's going to be a lot of unexpected things happening, a lot of new matchups and different play styles that are going to take place, and it's going to be fun watching and also kind of getting a feel for, what program really makes the adjustment very well. And when I look at this new conference and kind of like all this unknown, I tend to find myself leaning towards that veteran presence on the sidelines and that proven guy who, not necessarily a big school, but they've had sustained success for a very long time. Kyle Whittingham is one of the best coaches in the nation, and I love what he does year in and year out. They have their quarterback, Cam Rising, coming back again. Just tons of experience at quarterback and the head coach. I really like the Utah Utes coming out of the Big 12. Shifting over to the Big 10, also interesting. New teams, new faces, new matchups. Give me Ohio State. Again, kind of like Georgia. You got to knock the dog off the top of the mountain there. Like, I can't reasonably pick another team at this particular moment because I know the consistency of Ohio State. Yes, it gets boring at times, them coming out on top most years and things like that, but they are a blue blood for a reason. They are a national championship team contending every year for a reason. I'll take Ohio State. And then ACC, my God. I mean, week 0 already threw a wrench in this whole thing. So who really knows, right? Obviously, people were high on Florida State. We saw what happened in Ireland. They are 0-1. You got teams like Miami, Clemson, NC State even. And I just sit back and I think, I think Clemson's on the decline. I'm not sure how much longer Dabo's going to be there, honestly, especially if they're not having that the success that they're used to on a annual basis. So I shift to Florida State and I think, I don't really trust DJU. I never have really. He's been at Clemson. He's been at Oregon State. In theory, he seems like he should work. He's a big body dude, can run the ball. He's got an arm, but there's just something that's not there with him. And I've never trusted him for being an elite quarterback of an elite team. So I can't in goodwill pick Florida State. So I'm going to be a prisoner of the moment, and I'm going to take Georgia Tech coming out of the ACC.
Wow.
And
okay.
I know that seems a little crazy, but honestly, you look at the team. Let's look at the media days building up to that game in Ireland. You see the interviews of the players and the coaches. That's a new program. These guys expect to win. They're confident. You saw it during the game. They weren't backing down from anything. They were controlling things. They were the better team that day. So I kind of have the advantage of already seeing a little bit of a sample size from them. Week 1 hasn't even kicked off yet, but we got to see that 0 matchup. So I don't know. I just love their attitude and the way that they played. And I think they can grind out some games, and I think they can win enough to come out of the ACC. Now, We shift over to the power. Or, I'm sorry. Was it the
Group of 5 or
Group of 5? Sorry.
6 or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, the group of 5 teams. This is an exciting addition, obviously, to the playoff bracket. The 12 seed is most likely going to be one of these smaller schools getting a chance to be the Cinderella story, right? We see it in March Madness all the time. I know that a lot of people like Memphis, teams like Boise State, and I'm kind of going to jump on the bandwagon here. I didn't want to go all chalk. I mean, I picked Georgia Tech and things like that because I never feel good going all chalk, but I kind of like Boise State here. I can't give you concrete, like, just undeniable reasons. I don't think I can convince you to side with me with my argument, but there's just something about it. I look at the schedules and I look at the players, and I don't know, something about Boise State sticking out to me. I could be very wrong here, but with college football, until they kick the football off, we don't really know a lot of things, right? So my hunch is telling me Boise State in that spot. What do you think?
I think that's fair. Boise is one that you always kind of have to keep in mind. So I can't go against that. So for my college football playoff predictions of the Power 4 and then the Group of 5, I'll start in the ACC, and I'm going to go Miami. Cam Ward, what Cristobal has been able to kind of develop, they were able to transfer in Damian Martinez from Oregon State at running back. He was all Pac-12 twice. And then they've signed some 5-star guys, freshmen though, but along the defensive line. And we talked about it earlier. The defensive line is an important aspect of being able to have success. So if some of those players can step up and be key, I think Miami could come out of the ACC. In the Big 12, like you, I'm going to go Utah. Cam Rising is back. Kyle Whittingham. It's hard to go against Whittingham and what they have. And then they added Dorian Singer at wide receiver. I just like the Utes out of the Big 12. I think that could be a tight contest, though. Number of teams that could easily earn that bid. Big 10, I can't go against Ohio State. I just think they have so much talent, both on the offense and defensive side. The biggest question mark is going to be at quarterback with Will Howard. The Kansas State transfer moving in or coming over from the Wildcats wasn't overly impressive at K-State, so is he able to play to the level that they need to be a championship quality team? I don't know, and we'll see. But I think there's so much talent around him. They got Jenkins from Ole Miss. They have Henderson back. They could just pound the ball if they really want to. But don't sleep on Michigan. I think they still have some potential there as well. SEC, like you mentioned, Georgia, Kirby Smart and what he's developed, that defense is just always impressive, and with Carson Beck at quarterback. And then that brings me to my Group of 5. I'm going to go UTSA. Jeff Traylor, they went 9-4 last year. Their schedule, Texas is really the only Power 5 team that's on their schedule. Okay, yeah, you have one loss there. You could still have a really good shot the rest of the season, and that's a program that is on the rise, in my opinion, in UTSA with what Jeff Traylor is doing. And Owen McCown, yes, one of the McCowns. He actually transferred from Colorado. He is there and is expected to be the starting quarterback. So I think what the Roadrunners are able to do, that could be a lot of fun. And I'm going to go ahead and say they will be the Group of 5 team out of the American Athletic Conference.
I'm not surprised. You've always been a UTSA guy, I've noticed.
I am.
Well,
I tried not to go Texas State. I kept myself back from
Kinney, baby.
the Kinney train there.
But really, at this point, I mean, you kind of have to go off of feeling, honestly. I mean, you know, I was looking at Boise State, and I just think their schedule is so favorable for them. I mean, you know, Mountain West, you've got teams like who's going to compete with Boise State? Fresno State, maybe UNLV, maybe Air Force.
Hey, I will not sleep on UNLV. What Coach
Right. I
Odom
don't
is doing,
know.
I mean, no, I know, but I mean, what they're doing there in Vegas has been impressive so far. They had a great season last year. Brennan Marion as their offensive coordinator. The offense should only improve. It'll be interesting to see how that year two under Barry Odom plays out.
It's yeah, it's an interesting thing in the Mountain West to look at, and you know, Boise State actually has to go to UNLV to play, so
Yeah, they
you
play
know,
at
that
Oregon,
might make a
like you
difference.
mentioned.
We don't know, but UNLV kind of threw me off because I mean, they've got games at Houston, at Kansas, at Oregon State. Corvallis is such a hard place
Oh,
to
yeah.
play, no matter how that team looks on any given year. And then, you know, Boise State, they got to protect home field against Boise State. So I think there's just a lot more obstacles in the way for UNLV than
Yeah.
Boise State. And then another team that I mentioned earlier, Memphis, has been a popular pick out of the group of five. But again, going back to just schedules, you know, Memphis has got to go. In a couple of weeks, they got to go to Florida State and play. Obviously, Florida State's going to be pissed off. They're going to be looking to rebound. You know, later in the year, Memphis has got to go down to UTSA, Steve's team. They got to beat them. Last game of the year, they got to travel to Tulane. I mean, I compared schedules, and that's really kind of the difference maker that I landed on with Boise State.
It's going to come down where the committee feels. I feel like. I mean, you look at Boise State's. Yes, I think they have a tougher schedule. So if they're able to
Boise
get
State kind of have an advantage in a way of, you know, they were kind of that mid-major, right? That Gonzaga,
Oh,
that
yeah.
mid-darling for a long time.
Mhm.
Is the name brand recognition of Boise State going to play in their favor in
I
this
think
situation?
that, and then the fact that they're going to have two Pac-2 schools on their schedule. I mean, you play Oregon, who's in the Big Ten now. Number 3, say that goes as we would expect. That Boise loses to Oregon. 2 weeks later, you're playing Washington State, and then you close the season against Oregon State. Those are 2 games, both at home against Pac-2.
They got to take care of those games. Yeah,
They've got to win those games. But if you win that, I think the name recognition on those 2 opponents is going to stand out more than a UTSA where you're playing in the American Athletic Conference.
And that loss, I mean, whatever happens in the Oregon game, if they take care of those other 2,
Yes,
you know, Washington State and Oregon State, like you mentioned,
and I think that's where
Doesn't matter
the committee would probably lean towards Boise State. Those are 2 tough games. Don't get me wrong; those are 2 tough games for Boise. But if they take care of them, I think the name recognition of those opponents and the name recognition of Boise could definitely give them the advantage within the committee.
And you looking ahead, you know, if we get to that Oregon State game where if it's a win and end situation for Boise State, they've got Oregon State at home. You're telling me that place isn't going to be absolutely rocking? I mean, the blue field isn't going to be going crazy for that last game. They're going to be ready for Oregon State. And like we said, it's not in Corvallis. They got it up there in Idaho. So they control their own destiny at the end of the season there. I don't see them losing to Oregon State. I could see them kind of potentially maybe slipping up against Washington State more earlier in the year. You know, they go to Oregon in week 2 and then come back to play Portland State. So it might be a little bit of a lull after the Oregon game. So it'll be interesting to see. But with that 12th seed, it's throw a dart at a dartboard for me. I mean, it's hard to really be confident in a pick.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that take. Those final couple, I think those final ones are just going to be definitely dart picks or dart throws when it comes to picking them. Who do you like for winning the national championship, for making it to the finals?
I didn't want to go chalk. Um, honestly, I will say this. I could just be kind of a homer here in a sense, but I think Oregon really has a shot to
I don't disagree.
at least, Final Four, but even national championship, depending on the draw of the bracket, of course. I'm putting Georgia in regardless. But I really think it could come down to the Big Ten schools. I think it's Ohio State or Oregon. And honestly, I don't have Ohio State as an overwhelming favorite over Oregon at this point in a playoff situation. Dylan Gabriel is going to be the steady hand that they need. And Oregon always packs a lot of talent, great coaching. And I think Oregon coming to the Big Ten is kind of going to be
Oh, did we lose Brad again? I think we lost Brad again. No. We had him and then he's gone. Let me send him a text message. Try to get him back and let him finish his thought there. As he has disappeared. When it comes to the college football playoff and kind of who you see, it's going to be interesting because it is going to be a war of attrition for sure this season. With a 12-team playoff, your top four that are earning the bye in the playoff are actually going to play a conference game, so they're going to end up playing just as many games, more than likely. So I think that plays a factor in all of this. And that's going to lead to, hey, there's more teams there's more games, which will lead to potentially more injuries. So I think that's going to be a big thing. Brad just typed in, I think Oregon could be the biggest culture shock new face for Big Ten teams. And there's a lot of truth to that. I don't disagree with that take at all. I think that's a excellent take that, yeah, the style of play and what Oregon does, Dan Lanning, you throw in a Dylan Gabriel, Brad, as you're back, hopefully we can hear you. I think Dan Lanning being a defensive guy is going to have that playing, their defense is going to be playing better. And then you throw in a Dylan Gabriel who's playing his 5th, 6th season, whatever it is, and has had success. Probably he's going to end his career as one of the most prolific passers in college football history, statistics-wise. I think, like you said, it could be a culture shock. And his mic isn't working, which means he can hear me. But for some reason, his mic is not coming through right now. I'm going to probably go chalk as well. I just think the way things are set up, I would have to go Georgia and then Ohio State as well. I mentioned it. I don't exactly love the Ohio State selection for winning the Big Ten. I don't love them being kind of being in the final two necessarily, but I'm just going to go ahead and say Georgia, the Bulldogs, in my opinion, I'm going to say they win the national championship, and then go with Ohio State to be the team they beat when we get to that point of the season, and what will be a longer season than we've ever seen when it comes to college football. And like I mentioned, the war of attrition, depth is going to be a key, and I think that's why Georgia and Ohio State will be the last two teams standing, and I'm going to go with Georgia to win it all. Let's transition over to our Against the Spread picks as Brad is back in. We'll see if his mic's working. Hello, Brad? And it may not be. And that's all right. We're about to wrap up anyways. Against the Spread, I'll run down Brad's picks as it looks like he's not going to work. You can definitely check out his picks on TikTok. He's able to hear me, and he's able to comment. So be sure to check out our TikTok, Game On Pod on TikTok. Also our Instagram, I believe that is Game On Guys, and then Facebook, Game On Pod, Twitter, Game On Guys, or X, I should say, is Game On Guys. So either Game On Pod or Game On Guys on most social media platforms will find us. You can see Brad's picks for his against the spread. He's going to go with Arizona minus 31, LSU minus 4, and Georgia minus 13.5. For my picks, let me run those down for you here as we look to wrap things up on this first edition of the 2024 Game On Pod. I'm going to go with Colorado, minus 10 against North Dakota State. Yes, this is a team that's projected to finish second in the FCS, but I like the Buffaloes over the Bison. Colorado, minus 10. I see that being at least a 2-touchdown victory when all is said and done. I'm also going to stick with the Missouri Valley Football Conference and their opponents, Oklahoma State minus 9.5 against South Dakota State. I see OSU being able to top that. Again, a 10, 12, 14-point victory. It's not going to be by a ton, but 10 points gets me the win, and I'm going to go Oklahoma State minus 9.5. And then to wrap things up, Notre Dame. I'm going to go with the Fighting Irish plus 3 at Texas A&M. I like what Marcus Freeman's doing, and he has been able to bring in Al Golden as his defensive coordinator. I just think things could be looking up for the Irish, at least in Week 1 against Mike Elko and his squad for the first time this season as the new head coach of the Aggies. So my picks, Colorado minus 10, Oklahoma State minus 9.5, and Notre Dame plus 3. Those are my Week 1 2024 against the spread picks. All right, we will wrap things up as Brad's having technical issues. It was kind of a makeshift setup for both of us, so we've experienced some technical issues throughout the evening, but we'll have those ironed out and ready to go as we move forward throughout this season. Typically, we will have our podcast recorded on Tuesday nights and have something posted by Wednesday, Thursday at the latest, all season long. We'll get into some fantasy picks as well, like we did in the past, and hopefully have some fun along the way. You can always follow us numerous ways. Visit our website, gameonpod.com. TikTok, that's gameonpod. Email us at emailgameon@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, GameOnPod, and GameOnGuys on Twitter, along with Instagram, which I will actually pull that up right this minute just to double check I've got it right. I believe it's Game On Pod, but we'll double check that. It is indeed at gameon.pod is how you can follow us on Instagram as well. Great way to see our Against the Spread picks and other takes that we have throughout the show. Thank you for joining us. Hope you will join us next week. For Brad Bollinger, I'm Steve Braun. This has been Game On.